A year ago, my history teacher, Mr. Hale, refused to turn off the lights and hide us while gunfire approached our wing. When I suggested, let's at least close the blinds, he said, "One more word and you're out of my class." Yesterday, he was led out of his apartment in handcuffs. It was May, the last quarter, 5th period, AP US History, classroom 214, corridor F. Outside the windows was a cloudy sky before a storm, and the air smelled of marker and bleach. We were chewing on the end of the school year. Someone was coordinating presentation topics. Someone was whispering about graduation. Someone was dozing over a paragraph about the age of progress. I leafed through a notebook and pretended to listen, but in reality, a list was rattling around in my head. Finish the essay, call mom, don't forget my badge for my part-time job. The voice from the loudspeaker struck unexpectedly, like a slap on metal, but without any hints. It was immediately clear for real. Attention everyone, lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. At our school, these phrases have been drilled into our brains since kindergarten. Turn off the lights, move away from the windows, take cover by the inner wall, silence, wait. We've done this dozens of times. The body knows this trajectory. Hand to the switch, glance at the curtains, move the chair, desk to the door. Half the class had already stood up. "Take your seat," Mr. Hale said evenly. He didn't even raise his voice, he just snapped his belt in the air. "There are no drills planned for today. That means someone is having fun, and no one is going to have fun at my expense." Several people hovered between standing and sitting. The rustling of fabric, muffled mms, restrained nervous laughter, and silence, in which you could hear the hands of the clock scratching the dial. I raised my hand, a ridiculous reflex, and I heard myself say, "We definitely need to turn off the lights." He replied, "You must follow the teacher's instructions. The lights stay on. The door is open. No panic." The loudspeaker hissed again, and something sunk in my chest. "Code red. All rooms, immediately carry out the lockdown procedure." They only repeat something like that when it's true. Really true. The voices around me seemed to have gone into a cotton wool room. I turned towards the door. The lights in the hallway were on, dazzlingly bright, like on an operating table. Opposite, at Mrs. Reddy's, it was already dark. I saw the silhouette of the tabletop moved closer to the door. The first shot was somewhere far away, short, sharp, like someone had hit an empty stairwell with a hammer. I heard it with my body. My throat went dry, the skin on my hands broke out in goosebumps, and my stomach felt cold, like someone had put an ice cube in it. Then the second, the third, closer. The phones came to life simultaneously. My palm vibrated. Ellie lit up on the screen. She was in chemistry 2 corridors away. "We're in the reagent cabinet, locked, shooting. Where are you?" Next comes James, under Garcia's desk, quiet. My fingers wouldn't obey me. I showed the screen to Mr. Hale. He didn't even look. "Put your phones away. I'm not interested in your performances." A 4th shot rang out. Someone somewhere screamed, not a movie scream, drawn out, but short, alive, as if the air had been ripped out of their chest. Someone in our group subbed. I felt my knee shaking and heard, yes, my heart pounding in my ears. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw my own face. Too pale, too grown up. "We need to close the blinds," I said, no longer asking. "Hannah." He said my name like a sentence. "Sit down. This is your last warning." He stood by the light switch, exactly where the light switch should be, covering it with his elbow as if it were not a plastic button, a red missile launch button. His eyes were calm, his voice smooth. There was something icy about him that I used to mistake for adult confidence. Now I understood. It was a habit of being right. The next shot sounded closer, as if they had moved from the end of the corridor to the middle. A strange voice crackled in the speakerphone and then cut off. For a second, I felt like I was 7 again, my hands shaking before reciting a poem at a school performance. Only now, a life might depend on how you said the words. I stood up. "I'm turning off the lights," I said, my voice breaking, but I didn't stop. "Sit down," he said loudly, "or you'll leave my class and never come back." It was painfully absurd. Leave? Where? Into the hallway? Into the shooting? Sometimes authority sounds like madness, and you only realize it when you've already taken a step. I took 2. He tried to grab my forearm, not gruffly, but confidently. I jerked my arm back like from a hot iron and poked my thumb into the plastic. Click! The lamps on the ceiling die one by one, as if an entire galaxy was going out. The dark room is not completely dark. The crack under the door still glows with the white light of the hallway. And as if that wasn't signal enough, the class sprang into action. No hysterics, just the need to work with their hands. 2 desks to the door, the chest of drawers with cards sideways, the basket with textbooks on top. I heard the linoleum creak, someone whispering, "Please, please." Someone's Ningermail scraping the tabletop as they pushed it. Tom and Sarah were stuck in their seats as if concrete had set around their feet. Julie and I literally dragged them into the corner. I felt someone's palm against mine, warm, sticky, I don't know whose. We huddled in the shadows by the inner wall, 23 teenagers, who at the moment did not want to live, to disappear, to be invisible to the eye, inaudible to the ear, so that no one would know we were there. One person did not want to disappear. Mr. Hale remained at the table, half a step from the rectangle of light seeping under the door. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the principal, at his inner board where order against panic had already been written in chalk. "You're all..." He searched for the word, and his mouth usually found the coldest ones. Hysterical. Social media has turned you into a generation incapable of tolerating threat without drama. The doorknob jerked. Once. Again. As if someone outside had decided to check if it opened easily. The metal groaned under the pressure, but the lock held. We stopped breathing. I felt Julia's shoulder press against mine, someone's teeth chattering nearby, a microscopic tremor that felt like thunder. A shadow slid under the crack. It stopped for 2 endless seconds. I thought I heard breathing on the other side. Or was it my own heart beating so hard that the blood was roaring in my ears? The shadow moved. The footsteps receded. I don't know how long the next few minutes lasted. A clock in the dark as the beast without a face. There were only 3 sounds inside. Rare shots somewhere out there. Someone's intermittent, quiet, "God, please." And my own pulse beating against my ribs like a bird against a window. "It will all end," someone whispered. I don't know who. "It will all end." Sarah, the one we pulled away from the desk, suddenly cried silently, as if water was just foaming from her eyes, and I handed her a napkin that I had taken from the cafeteria vending machine that morning. She squeezed my hand so tightly, as if it were holding me in place. I thought about my mom, how she was at work now, in her green scrubs, how her eyes would go blank for a few seconds when someone called from an unknown number. About my dad, how he would throw his mug in the sink because his hands always acted a second faster than his brain when he was scared. And about my younger brother, how he hid my charger from me yesterday and I promised to get revenge, and how pointless that sounds now when the air smells of fear like a hand sanitizer wipe. And I also thought about Mr. Hale. What must be going on inside a person for them to choose obey when the only correct command is to run? I remembered his favorite phrase, "Authority is society's seatbelt." Who would have thought that a seatbelt could be tightened so much that it starts to choke you? When the doors finally opened, the team in armor, the clicks of flashlights, the short, "Clear! Come!" I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails left crescent marks on my palms. The light hit my eyes. Not the hallway light, but a directed light. White as a scalpel. They let us out 3 at a time, a hand on the shoulder of the person in front, like a string through a dark forest. Mr. Hale rose from his chair and said out loud, "Maintaining order saved these children." One of the police officers looked at him as if he didn't understand the language. I understood it all too well. The street was loud and bright. Sirens were blaring, journalists were already setting up their tripods, parents were arguing about the orange tape. They put a blood pressure cuff on me, the nurse asked me to breathe deeply and if I felt dizzy. My head was spinning and not from breathing. I saw Ellie coming out of the school door, safe and sound, and something in my chest opened up like a window. Our eyes met across the buzzing field of people. Her pupils dilated like a frightened animal, mine like someone who had seen home after a long winter. She gave me a thumbs up and a weak smile. I smiled back for half a second, and then my hands started shaking again. The police quickly cordoned off part of the parking lot with tents. Parents were let in according to lists. I heard
The days after the tragedy merged into one long nightmare. We didn't go back to school. The building was closed, cordoned off with yellow tape, and investigators and police were still working inside. It seemed as if it had ceased to be a school and had become a crime scene. I hardly slept at night. The slightest sound, a door slamming, a car horn, made me jump, my heart pounding as if the shooter were still somewhere nearby. I kept remembering how the door handle to our classroom jerked. If the lock hadn't held, we wouldn't be here anymore. That thought ate away at me. My mother tried to help. She made cocoa, sat next to me, stroked my hair like she did when I was a child. But I was no longer the same. We had all changed. It felt like my childhood had been stolen from me that day. 3 days later, the funerals began. First was Emily, the girl who sat behind me in math class. She always drew flowers in the margins of her notebook. Now her photo stood on the coffin among Lila. Her parents looked as if their souls had been torn out. When I hugged her mother, she whispered through her tears, "You survived. Please live for her now." The next funeral was even harder. Daniel. He tried to run away, but he didn't make it. Then, when we were allowed to return to school just to get our things, I saw his empty desk. His backpack was still hanging on the back of the chair. I touched it and felt so guilty that I almost fainted. Why him? Why not me? The city tried to hold itself together. There were candlelight vigils, people sang, prayed, spoke words of hope and forgiveness. But I was just angry. Every time someone said, "We must forgive," I wanted to scream. Forgive! Forgive the man who came to school with a gun and aimed it at children. Forgive the man who turned our classroom into a trap. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails left marks on my palms. Weeks passed, and we were brought back to class, not to the old building, but to a temporary learning center in a church hall. Instead of desks, there were folding chairs. The air smelled of old wood and hymn books. The teachers spoke quietly, cautiously, as if any harsh word could destroy us. Psychologists came. They asked us to draw our feelings, to talk about what we had been through. Some shared. Others remained silent. I remained silent. Because every time I tried to open my mouth, my throat tightened, tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt myself back in that classroom, curled up on the floor, waiting to die. One night, I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. My dad wanted to leave town. He said it was impossible to start over here, that everything around us was saturated with horror. My mom was against it. She argued that leaving would mean letting fear win. I lay in the dark, clutching my blanket, and suddenly realized the shooting had broken not only us, the children. It had torn everyone apart, families, friends, the whole city. And yet, amid the pain, a small spark began to appear. At one of the vigils, I saw schoolchildren from other states who had also experienced something similar. They held signs that read, "Enough and never again." They weren't just crying, they were fighting. And then, for the first time in a long time, I felt something like strength. We couldn't bring back the past, but maybe we could change the future. After that day, time ceased to exist. I don't remember the hours. I don't remember the dates. Everything merged into one murky stream filled with anxiety, news, and tears. At first, we weren't allowed to leave our homes. The police advised families to stay together because people were in shock, and the city seemed to have frozen. The streets seemed unusually empty. Even those who went to the store or pharmacy moved like ghosts, with their eyes downcast, in complete silence. I hardly slept. I closed my eyes and immediately returned there, to the classroom. I heard those shots. I heard someone moaning in pain in the hallway. I saw the door handle twitching. I remembered Lisa's heavy breathing next to me, her fingers digging into my shoulder. I woke up screaming, and my mother came running into the room, stroked my head, and whispered, "You're home. Everything's fine. You're home." But I knew that I would never be fine at home again. A few days later, the funerals began. I remember the first ceremony as if it were yesterday. Emily, the girl who sat next to me in math class, had died. She loved to draw flowers in her notebook, and the teacher always scolded her for messing up the margins. Now her photo stood among lilac, and in the coffin lay a body that would never draw another flower. I looked at her parents. Their faces were gray as ashes. When I went up and hugged her mother, she whispered, "You survived. Live for her now. Please." Those words stabbed me like a knife. Since then, they haven't left me for a second. The next funeral was for Daniel. He was the guy who was always joking, always smiling. That day, he tried to run away, but he didn't make it. When, a couple of weeks later, we were allowed into the school building just to pick up our things, I saw his desk. Everything was left as if he were going to come out in a minute. An open textbook, a pencil, a backpack on a chair. I touched that backpack, and I felt so sick that I almost fell down. Why him? Why not me? That was the only thought in my head. The city tried to come together. In the evenings, they held candlelight vigils. People sang and prayed. They put up photos of the victims in the square and brought flowers and toys. TV cameras filmed our every move, but it all felt wrong. When I heard the words, "We must forgive," I felt rage boiling up inside me. Forgive. Forgive the man who came with a gun and aimed it at my classmates. Forgive the man who took my friends away from me. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. A few weeks passed, and we were transferred to a temporary center, a church hall. Instead of the usual desks, there were folding chairs. It smelled of old wood and candle wax. The teacher spoke more quietly than usual, as if afraid of hurting us with a single extra word. The lessons were hardly lessons at all. We talked more, Drew, tried to share our feelings. Sometimes psychologists came. They asked us to describe our dreams and draw our experiences. Some people talked, some cried. I remained silent, because every time I tried to speak, my chest tightened and I heard that sound again, machine gun fire. I was back there again on the floor, covering my ears with my hands. At night, I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. Dad said we had to leave. We can't live here, he insisted. Every house, every street will remind us. Mom replied firmly, leaving means letting fear win. We have to stay. I lay in my room, pressing my pillow to my face, and thought, the shooting destroyed not only us, the children. It broke our parents, our families, our whole city. For the first few weeks, I was afraid to go outside. Every passerby seemed suspicious. Every sharp sound echoed inside me. Once, a frying pan fell in the kitchen, and I screamed as if I were under fire again. My mother dropped everything, ran over, and hugged me. I sobbed, repeating, I can't take it anymore. I can't. But then something happened that became a small spark for me. It was at another vigil. Teenagers from another state came to our city. They had also experienced a school shooting. They held signs that read, enough and never again. They gave speeches, loud, powerful speeches. They didn't just cry. They fought. I looked at them, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something new growing inside me. Maybe we can't change the past, but maybe we can change the future. It was on that evening that I thought for the first time, I have to speak up. I have to tell my story. I can't stay silent. The months after the tragedy dragged on like a sticky quagmire. Life seemed to go on. Buses ran, shops were open, the sun rose and set. But for us, time stopped on that day. Every time I walked past the school, my heart sank. The building stood empty, the windows boarded up, flowers and photographs of the victims on the gates. People came there as if to a memorial. I avoided that street, but sometimes I found myself there anyway, as if drawn by some force. Then I would stop at the fence and just stare. And I felt everything inside me crumbling again. A few months later, the trial began. The newspapers and television reported every little detail, showing photos of the shooter and interviews with his neighbors. I hated it. It seemed to me that they were turning him into a celebrity. His face flashed across the screens more often than the faces of the victims. It was unbearable. One evening, I heard my father arguing with a reporter right at the door. "Leave us alone," he shouted. "My daughter can hardly sleep, and you keep shoving your cameras in her face." I watched from around the corner as my father trembled with anger, and for the first time I saw how broken he was. At the trial, I sat next to my mother. The room was cold with white walls, ceiling lamps, and the smell of paper and coffee. And there he was, in an orange prison jumpsuit. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was an ordinary person. Not a monster, not a beast, not a shadow from a nightmare. Just a guy with pale skin and downcast eyes. And that was what scared me the most. That an ordinary person could so easily turn into a murderer. When the prosecutor read out the names of the victims, I sobbed, and my mother squeezed my hand. The word murder was repeated dozens of times. Each name sounded like a blow to the chest. I heard the quiet cries of parents, heard someone faint. After one hearing, we returned home, and I locked myself in my room. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "Why am I alive? Why not them?" There was no answer, and there never will be. Some of us started going to psychologists and joining support groups. I tried it too, but I remained silent at the meetings. Others spoke. Some had seen blood, some had lost a sister, some had been wounded themselves. I listened, and I didn't have the strength to say a word. I was afraid that if I started, I would be overwhelmed by an avalanche of screams and tears, and I wouldn't be able to stop. But then I had a dream. I'm standing in the school hallway. It's dark around me. I walk forward and see Emily. She smiles and waves her hand. But behind her is emptiness, black and endless. I shout, "Wait, don't go." But she disappears, and I wake up with a wet pillow. In the morning, I told my mom, and she said, "It's a sign. You have to speak up before her voice disappears." From that day on, I decided to at least try. Meetings began to be organized in the city, parent committees, gatherings of survivors. They talked about laws, about school safety. At one of the meetings, I was given the floor. I was shaking, my knees were buckling, my voice was breaking. But I still said, I don't want to see empty desks anymore. I don't want anyone else to look into the eyes of a mother who has lost a child. We have to change something. And the room applauded. For the first time after all this, I felt my pain turning into strength. But don't think it got any easier. At night, it all came back. Sometimes I would sit by the window, listening to the silence, and suddenly it seemed to me that shooting would start again around the corner. I would flinch at any loud noise, a door slamming, fireworks, even my mother's footsteps on the stairs. A year passed. We returned to a different school, in a new building. White corridors, the smell of fresh paint. Everything was supposed to be a clean slate. But we all had a long trail of pain behind us. During the first lesson, we were silent, not looking up. The teacher said quietly, "We will start over." But we will never forget. I opened my notebook and wrote on the first page, "Live for those who are gone." It became my motto. That year, I started keeping a diary. Every night, I wrote about how I felt. Sometimes it was a cry for help, sometimes a plea for help, sometimes just a list of names of those who had died. I was afraid that time and the news would erase my memories. I wanted to leave a mark. I also started writing letters to Emily. Real letters on paper. I told her about my day, about little things, about our classmates. Sometimes I even joked as if she were still there. Then I put the letters in a box under my bed. It was the only thing that kept me from going crazy. But the hardest part was something else. Every time I met the parents of the victims, I felt ashamed. I didn't know how to look them in the eye. It felt like my breath was stealing their breath. My heart was beating instead of their child's heart. And that made the heaviness inside me unbearable. One day, my mother said, "You have to stop blaming yourself. You didn't survive to suffer. You survived to tell the story." I will remember those words forever. 2 years have passed. Life seems to have become normal. A new school, new teachers, a new campus. But I realized that I could never be the same as before. We were sitting at the graduation party, all wearing the same robes and square caps. The hall was ablaze with lights. Parents were filming, laughter, and applause. But I saw empty seats. I knew who was supposed to be sitting next to me. I could hear their voices in my head. And at some point it became so hard for me to smile that I just looked down and cried. No one noticed. Everyone was busy celebrating. When my name was announced and I went up to get my diploma, I felt strange, as if I were walking not only for myself, but for those who did not live to see it. I held this piece of paper in my hands and realized that this was not my victory. This is their memory. We had a party after graduation. Music, dancing, the smell of alcohol, someone was laughing, someone was kissing. But I stood aside. It was hard for me to be part of a noisy crowd. It seemed like I was a stranger among my own people. One day, Jake came up to me and smiled. "Why don't you dance?" I shrugged my shoulders, not mine. He didn't fall behind. "Come on, at least one dance." And I agreed. We danced slowly to soft music, and at some point I suddenly felt my heart beating faster. It was a new feeling that someone nearby might not be a threat, but a support. We started dating. Jake was caring, calm, and he didn't ask questions. But I kept my distance anyway. Every time he touched my hand, I shuddered, as if someone could snatch this fragile warmth from me. A few months later, I went to university, to another city. Everything was new there, large classrooms, bustling campuses, new faces. I thought that a new life would begin here, but the memories came with me. On my first day on campus, when the fire alarm went off, I threw myself on the floor in a panic. The people around were laughing. Someone said, "Yes, it's a test. Calm down." But my knees were shaking, my breath was coming in short gasps, and my heart was pounding. I heard those screams again, those gunshots. It took me a few hours to come to my senses. Then there were the nights. I was lying in the dorm. My roommates were giggling and chatting, and I was staring at the ceiling. Every time there was a pop outside the window, whether it was fireworks or a car, I cringed, and I couldn't sleep again. Sometimes I would go to the roof of the dorm and sit there, looking up at the stars. I wrote in my diary, "Why is life moving on?" And I'm stuck there that day. Why do I feel guilty for every laugh, for every new step? But one day, volunteers who worked with traumatized teenagers came to the campus. They organized a lecture, and I went there almost by accident. There was a woman who had experienced a similar tragedy 10 years ago. She spoke confidently, her voice trembled, but there was strength in her eyes. "You think you'll never be able to escape," she said, "but it is your pain that makes you who you are. You can turn it into light." Those words cut into me. I came out of the lecture, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could. I started writing articles for the student newspaper about what it's like to live after that. Not just statistics, but feelings, smells, and memories. Many students came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you. We didn't know what it was like inside." But not everyone understood. Sometimes I've heard, "Why do you keep remembering? Better forget it." But it's impossible to forget. And I stopped trying. We had difficulties with Jake. He came to my campus and tried to support me. But sometimes he got angry. "You never really talk to me. You keep everything to yourself. I don't understand what you want." And I couldn't explain it, because the words did not convey the abyss that is in me. As a result, we broke up. I cried, but I knew it had to happen. He needed someone else. And I was still a girl from a school where there was a shooting. The years passed. I studied, worked, and wrote articles. She sometimes spoke at conferences about school safety. The first time, I almost fainted from fear, but then I started to get used to it. I saw teenagers, parents, and teachers in the audience. I saw their eyes, and I knew that my voice was needed. But at night, when I was alone, everything came back. I'd sit by the window, open the box of letters to Emily, and read them again. I felt that she was still there. One day I went home to that very city. I was walking down the street and saw the school building. It was rebuilt a long time ago, and a memorial was made. White walls, photographs, an alley with trees. I walked over and ran my hand over the stone on which the names were carved. And she whispered, "I live for you. I won't give up." At that moment, for the first time in many years, I felt light. It was as if a heavy stone had left my chest. Not completely, but at least a little. And then I realized that my story wasn't over yet. And it will never end. Because every day I will learn to live anew. Years have passed. At first, 5 is like one long breath, then 10 is like a series of seasons where winter lingers longer than it should. I've learned to live between reminders. The sound of a garbage truck in the morning, like a distant volley, the smell of bleach in the hospital hallway instantly takes me back to May, to bleach and markers in auditorium 214. I've learned to notice it, name it, breathe it, and let it go. Mom and I moved to a neighboring city, but Dad, despite all his fears, stayed. He opened a repair shop and became the very person to whom you can come to fix everything, from a broken closet door to trembling hands. That's what he said. Sometimes, in order to survive, you have to give people a screw and explain that it can be tightened. He was good at it. I graduated from university and couldn't stop. She took a master's degree in educational policy and crisis psychology. I listened to teachers, read research, argued in seminars, and all the time I kept in mind our long corridor F, the crack under the door, and the white light. In one of the courses, we were given the task of writing a case study on human factors during emergencies. I've written 25 pages about how an adult's words, spoken in a confident tone, can outweigh sirens, instructions, and a child's own instinct. The professor, gray-haired and neat, wrote in the margins, "This should be read by everyone who works at the school." I began to travel around the districts with lectures. I've met principals, teachers, and parents. In small towns, whole halls gathered, chairs were stacked, homemade cookies were brought, coffee was poured into paper cups. I stood up to the microphone and said, about responsibility, about protocols, about how important it is that the authority knows how to apologize, and not just give orders. I didn't mention the shooter's name. I called out the names of those we had lost. Our memory should nourish life, not a shadow. Sometimes teenagers would come up to me, one at a time, after the performances. Someone's fingers were trembling. Someone was hiding their gaze. They asked, "Is it true that fear never goes away?" I answered honestly, "He's changing. He ceases to be the master. You will become the one who turns out the lights when needed. And, most importantly, who knows how to turn them on?" One day, I was invited to speak in our old town, where the school had been rebuilt a long time ago. Now, in its place, there is a memorial center and a new campus, in which the walls are light, the doors are locked from the inside, and hours of psychological support have been added to the schedule. I rode there on the train and looked out the window, fields, roadside gas stations, lazy clouds. I'm 29, and I keep a flash drive with a presentation in my bag, paper abstract cards, and one very old napkin from the dining room, the one I once handed to Sarah in the dark. I carry it like a little memory charm. The memorial hall greeted me with silence. There are photographs along the walls, school plays, sports teams, outstanding students over the years. In the center is a stone stele with the names of the dead. I ran my fingers over the letters, lingering on each name. The lila nearby smelled tart. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm here. I remember you. I live so that you will be remembered." The meeting was full of people. The familiar faces had aged. The new ones were attentive and focused. In the front row, I saw Amar Garcia, the biology teacher, gray-haired, wearing glasses, with the same soft gaze. We hugged tightly, like people who had been through the same storm. A teenage girl was sitting next to him, probably his daughter. She clutched a notebook in her hands. I started talking about how fragile everything that we call normal life is, about how important it is that every school knows its procedures at the level of muscle memory, and every adult in the class is not shy about saying "I'm wrong" on time, about how children are really great at being rational in chaos if they are trusted and taught in advance. That order without empathy is just a cold sound. I talked about research, how workouts are useful just as much as they don't turn into a theatrical routine, how information and transparent rules reduce panic, how a simple light door, silence things save seconds, and seconds, lives. I've seen people nod. Someone was writing it down. Someone was crying softly. The questions dragged on one after another about fear, about survivor's guilt, about how to talk to children when the world is collapsing. And then a boy of about 12 raised his hand and asked, "And you're the one who turned off the lights?" The room became even quieter. I felt my throat constrict for a second, but I smiled and answered, "That day, yes. I turned off the lights to keep us alive. And then I learned for a long time to turn it on, in myself and in others." After the performance, a woman came up to me, a very young woman with a round pregnant face and quiet joy in her eyes. She said, "I read your text yesterday, the one where you talk about the crack under the door. I work as a first-grade teacher. I wrote out your phrase to myself. Authority is not a belt. It's a safety belt. It should hold, not strangle. Thank you." I nodded and suddenly realized that the words that once made my hands shake were now my tools. Not even shields, but bridges. Everything was over with Mr. Hale a long time ago. His case has become exemplary. Law textbooks dedicate a paragraph to him with the term criminal indifference. Sometimes journalists wrote to me, asking for comments on the next anniversary. I've learned to respond in a way that doesn't rekindle old pain for the sake of fragile ratings. Our choice is to remember those we have lost and build systems in which stubbornness has no power over security, wrote my press release, almost impersonal. But inside, I remember down to the smallest detail the left wall of the classroom, the metallic taste of fear, and how he stood at the light switch. Sometimes I dreamed of different endings of that scene. In one dream, he walks away from the light switch by himself, lowers his eyes and whispers, "I'm sorry." We all hide in time. No one gets killed. I wake up with wet eyelashes and a thought as light as breathing. In another life, maybe. But in the morning, after washing my face, I return to my reality again, where little is possible and much is needed. I run a program for young teachers. We replay scenarios, alarm, evacuation, medical care, conversation with the class after. We learn not to devalue children's fear with the phrases, "It's okay" and "Don't be dramatic." We learn to recognize that it's scary to eat and act in spite of it. Sometimes one of the interns asks, "What if I freeze?" I reply, "That's why we train. Freeze like a human being." But knowledge, repetition, and clear words are your leverage. You are not alone. And I show you a small plastic switch that we use in class as a metaphor. Click, and the mode in the room changes. It's funny and serious at the same time. They laugh, and they remember. In my personal life, I walked in circles for a long time, hugging the air. I was afraid of attachments, as if any joy could turn into a shadow falling from the sky at any moment. Then Mark appeared. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't ask, "Well, when will you let go of the past?" He was just there, putting the kettle on, turning on the bedside lamp when I woke up from a sharp sound. For a long time we lived as people who learned not to step on the same sore spots. And we did it. One day, when the summer fireworks rang out, I shuddered and covered my ears. He silently picked up the remote control and turned off the sound on the TV, and then put my palm on his pulse. "Do you hear? We're here, now." It was also a switch of a different kind. By the time I was 35, I had written a book. Not about how scary it was, but about how the system should learn from pain. There were stories of heroic teachers, principals who rebuilt practices from schedules to door stories of children who came up with silent alarms in the classroom, stories of cleaners who were the first to close unnecessary exits and knew the building plan best of all. The book went around the country, and I received hundreds of letters. One is from an elderly woman from out of state. "I've been studying history for 40 years. And for 40 years I thought that holding the classroom with an iron hand was my job. I was wrong. Thank you for explaining how to keep your heart and head together." I cried when I read this letter in the kitchen. Mom hugged me and repeated, "You're doing an important thing." On the 20th anniversary of the tragedy, our city held a ceremony at the memorial. People came from all over the country, former students, their children, teachers, mayors, senators. Someone was reading a prayer. Someone was reading poetry. I was the last one out. In his hands are those paper cards on which very little is written. Memory, responsibility, voice. I often think, I said, that our lives are divided into before and after. But there is still a between. This is the space where we choose every day to be silent or to speak, to close our eyes or to look honestly, to follow a formality or to defend the living human dignity. Then, in class 214, I turned off the light. It saved our lives. Since then, I've been learning to turn on the lights in conversations, in difficult decisions, in new rules. We didn't choose that pain, but we can choose who we will be after. I put the cards on the podium and looked at the faces in the audience. Families who have gone through the unthinkable. Teenagers who need to move on. Teachers who have their first lesson tomorrow. Someone is holding a candle. Someone is holding a notebook. Everyone has a heart that can beat and be afraid at the same time. And I felt a thread, thin as a blade, but very persistent, spreading somewhere in my chest. We are more than that shadow under the door. In the evening, we went to the alley of trees behind the memorial. Each one is in memory of someone's name. The wind rustled the leaves. I sat down on a bench, put my hand on my knee and closed my eyes. The world was filled with sounds, soft, lively, distant barking, conversations, footsteps, the rustle of pages. I was thinking that all this is also light, and that if it suddenly gets dark again, I know where the toggle switch is. At home, before going to bed, I opened the box of letters to Emily. She took out one, the earliest, and smiled crookedly. The handwriting was shaking, the words were getting confused, and the ink was blurred with tears. Then she took out a blank sheet and wrote a new one.